Action.
Okay, today's video we're going to talk a little bit more about the respiratory side and the details of what happens for the end of the delivery from the circulatory system. Remember that there were two sets of deliveries that go on. We go out to the body and end up in a set of capillaries. And we go out to the lungs to pick up oxygen, and we end up in another set of capillaries. Now yesterday we talked about a lot of the circulatory side and went through the processes of all the different places that it goes and went through all the different vessels, okay? But I wanted to show you and highlight for you a little bit with this picture exactly what goes on in the lungs side of it. We talked about the trachea where the air comes in and the bronchi where it splits out and starts to spread out through a bunch of windpipes, through air pipes called bronchioles in the lungs, okay? Now each of those bronchioles starts to branch out and they end up in these little bubbles almost like balloons that are called alveoli. Okay? These alveoli at the ends blow up like balloons, but each one of those is wrapped around by a set of capillaries. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, but I wanted to show you an exact example. This shows a set of the alveoli. Now these would all have their own capillaries, but this shows you the capillaries wrapped around them. The whole purpose is to bring blood really close to air. The sac is filled with air, and the blood is wrapped around it. So the blood has to go near the air so that the oxygen in the air can diffuse. Remember we talked about the word diffusion? Can diffuse through the blood vessel, through the sac, and be picked up by our red blood cells. Okay? Alright, now, let's take a look and we'll zoom in on this just a little bit. This is not a really good zoom in, but it kind of gives you the idea that the air sac here, the alveoli, is the light blue, that's surrounded by a blood vessel. The blood comes in, wraps around the sac, and then floats away. Now, remember it comes in from the heart. Where's it going back to? The heart again, right? Comes through the pulmonary artery, deoxygenated, comes out, hits the alveoli, where it picks up oxygen, which means the blood becomes oxygenated and heads back to the heart, so that the heart can then spread it out to the rest of the body, right? Okay, now let's take a look at this even a little bit closer. Okay? Now, we've shifted here and we're looking at one single blood vessel running across here where it comes in contact with an alveoli. Now, this is not quite to scale, okay? The alveoli is probably bigger than that compared to this blood vessel, okay? But what we've got is now there's a small space between them. And what's going to happen is diffusion of the oxygen out of the air into the blood. The blood is going to take the carbon dioxide that it picked up when it went out to the body, and it's going to diffuse that into the alveoli so that we can exhale and get rid of it. Okay? That's the final stage in getting rid of it, because the carbon dioxide is a waste product, something we don't want. So the blood picks it up from our cells, collects it in our lungs, and then breathes it out. Okay? So that's what we've got going on. Now, let's take a real quick look at the things that are actually in the blood that's doing this job. Since we've got this picture drawn up here, and it's got this big red thing. What is that?
Blood cell.
It's a blood cell, right? And it's red. So what do we call that?
A red blood cell.
A red blood cell. It's not exactly anything difficult, right? Okay, the name kind of tells you what it is. Well, one of your vocab words is the scientific word for red blood cell. Okay? If you look on your vocab list, you're going to find a word called an erythrocyte. An erythrocyte is the word for red blood cell. That's the scientific name for this guy that carries oxygen around the body. Okay? Now, red blood cells can be either oxygenated, meaning they're carrying oxygen, or deoxygenated, meaning they've given away the oxygen and they've got to go back and get more. Okay? So they're basically carrier trucks. They load up with oxygen, they take it out to your body, drop it off, and come back for more. That's all that they do. As a matter of fact, these guys are so specialized, these erythrocytes are so specialized. Remember specialization from before? What does it mean?
It means like you don't do anything else. You do this one.
You get good at one job and forget everything else. Red blood cells take specialization to an absolute extreme. Okay? They get so good at this one job, carry oxygen, drop it off, carry oxygen, drop it off, that they specialize to the point that they actually kick out most of their nucleus in order to be able to pick up more of the chemical that helps them carry oxygen. They hold just enough of their nucleus to keep the cell alive for a while, so they can put and stuff more what's called hemoglobin. That's the name of the chemical that actually carries the oxygen. Okay? You can see oxyhemoglobin here in the words. Oxy just means that it's carrying hemoglobin, or it's carrying oxygen at the time. The chemical is hemoglobin. Okay? That hemoglobin is in there to carry the oxygen. Now, talk about extreme specialization, right? Willing to cough up your nucleus so you can do that one job better. So that's pretty committed, right? All right, let's talk about some of the other things that are in the blood here, okay? Because there's more things going on. The blood is the carrying system for so much more than just, here's the red blood cells, drop off the oxygen. Because what does it also do? Brings food to your cells, takes the carbon dioxide to take it out, okay? All of that stuff has to be somewhere. It's in the liquid portion of the blood. It shows it here as kind of yellow, and it is, if you separate it out, it is a little bit the yellowish color. The red in blood that we see comes from oxygenated erythrocytes, okay? That's what makes blood red, is because there's a lot of these guys packed into this fluid. That fluid is called plasma, okay? This is where everything but the oxygen is dissolved in here. Everything else has to float along, okay? What's floating along? Food, other nutrients, the carbon dioxide. It'll also bring along electrolytes, things that help your cells run, okay? All the nutrients and things that you need that are being transported around, they're all dissolved in this plasma. They all float in there, okay? So that's two parts to blood. Blood isn't just one thing. It's a mixture. It's kind of like Kool-Aid. You put a bunch of stuff in there. You put the Kool-Aid in, you got the water, you got the sugar, you got all those things. You mix it together, it becomes one fluid. Okay? So we got erythrocytes, we got plasma. Does anybody know of another type of blood cell?
White blood cell.
White blood cells. Okay, so we know about white blood cells. What job do they do?
Fight off germs.
They fight off germs, they fight off infections, right? They're part of our immune system. Okay? Well, we're going to take a second for the scientific word for white blood cells. Now, if red blood cell came out as erythrocyte, cyte meaning cell, which of your vocab words do you think might mean white blood cell?
Leukocyte.
It's called a leukocyte. Very good. Good attempt. A leukocyte is the scientific name for a white blood cell. Those are the cells that are in the blood to fight off any bad things that might be floating around in there. Okay? So they're part of our immune system. So now we have erythrocytes that float around in plasma, along with leukocytes. And one more thing out of your vocab list. Platelets. Platelets are little tiny pieces that float around in here with the leukocytes and with the erythrocytes, and their job is to help your blood clot. Okay? Now, sometimes they do this in a bad way when they do it inside a blood vessel and those clots plug things up. But most of the time, the reason why they're there is if one of your blood vessels gets torn open or cut open, in order to heal it, well, what do we have to do first? We have to seal it up and close it, right? And then we can repair it. Well, a clot is what does that, okay? The platelets go along and they start forming the beginnings of the sticky paste that covers the inside of that blood vessel to seal it back up, okay? So platelets are the fourth piece that helps your blood clot. So now we've got what four things? What's it float in?
Plasma.
Plasma, okay? Plasma carries what other three things? What are the three things that float in plasma?
Leukocytes.
Leukocytes?
White blood cells.
White blood cells, yep.
And then there is erythrocyte.
Erythrocytes.
Erythrocyte. And then there's going to be ingredients.
Okay, nope. And platelets.
Platelets.
We get platelets, leukocytes, erythrocytes, they all float around in the plasma, and the plasma has what dissolved in it? Everything else. Food, carbon dioxide, okay? All that stuff is dissolved in the plasma. Okay, now, this is where we do the pick up and drop off, right? This is a capillary. Now, the other end of this, where we make the other delivery, we put capillaries with the same blood that just came from the lungs, right? So what kind of blood is it?
Deoxygenated.
Nope, it came from the lungs, so it is oxygenated blood, right? So oxygenated blood coming back from The lungs is going out to your body's tissue cells. Now, as we come across here, what's going to happen? It's going to drop off its oxygen by diffusion, and it's going to pick up carbon dioxide by diffusion. Okay? Now, the last of your vocab words that we need to talk about is the idea of what is a gradient. Okay? That's that weird word that you've never heard of that's just stuck in there at the end. Okay? Alright, what a gradient is it's the difference in the amount of something on opposite sides of a membrane, or on opposite sides of a capillary. Okay? So, what we have is, a gradient would be something like this, where the blood right now, since it just came back from the lungs, is very high in oxygen. These cells that have already used up their oxygen in cellular respiration, they've used it up, so they're very low. The gradient is the difference between the two. Because what do you think is going to happen here? Where it's very high is going to try and spill into and fill up where it's very low. A gradient is what provides the pressure to push diffusion in the direction we want it to go. Okay? So the gradient is the difference in the amount of something on opposite sides of the membrane. So in this case, we have high oxygen in the blood, low oxygen in the cells. So a gradient is going to push oxygen from blood to cells to try and even that up. Okay? Now, think about it. There's another gradient in this situation. What's it going to be? Where is there a lot of something, and then on the other side of the membrane, there's a little of something? Oxygen is high in the blood
CO2.
and low in the cells.
CO2.
The opposite is true for CO2. Okay? Carbon dioxide, remember, these cells have been doing cellular respiration. They've been using oxygen to get energy out of food. One of the byproducts, one of the waste products, is carbon dioxide. So they've been building up carbon dioxide in the cells. What did the blood just do with its carbon dioxide when it left the lungs?
Dump it out.
Dumped it, right? So the blood has a little bit, the cells have a lot. That difference, that gradient, right, is going to provide pressure to push carbon dioxide from cells to blood until they match. Okay? It's the difference in the amount, and that difference in the amount is the strength of the push to go from high to low. The bigger the difference, the bigger the push, and the faster it happens. Okay? So the gradient causes both these things to happen. A gradient is for one substance. There's a gradient for oxygen, and there's a gradient for CO2. Okay? So the gradient, the difference in, we got a lot of oxygen in the blood, we got a little oxygen in the cells, pushes it from blood to cells. Carbon dioxide, it does the exact opposite. Okay? Let's take a look at that. Does that make sense when we go back to the lung side of the capillaries, where we've got the alveoli and the blood? What's the gradient for oxygen look like here? What's high? Where's the high amount of oxygen in this case?
The alveoli.
The alveoli has a lot of oxygen because it just came in from the outside, right? It just came in with fresh air. So it has a lot of oxygen in the alveoli. The blood, though, just got back from doing what? Picking up carbon dioxide and delivering all of its oxygen, right? So it just got rid of all of its oxygen. It's low coming into the lungs, right? It's deoxygenated. So the gradient, the difference between the two, is going to push oxygen from where to where? From high alveoli to low blood. So the oxygen is going to push toward the blood. Carbon dioxide, what's it going to do? The blood just did what? Picked up a lot from the body cells, right? Is there a lot of CO2, carbon dioxide, in fresh air? It's really low. So, high in the blood, low in the air sac means the gradient's going to push from where to where? From high to low. From high blood to low alveoli, and it's going to push the carbon dioxide out so that you can exhale. Okay? So, to sum up the things that we talked about, we're going to talk about the respiratory system and things moving into and out of at the capillaries. And we've talked about how a gradient is what pushes the direction of the diffusion. The gradient being the difference between the concentrations of the amounts of those two things. All right, that's where we're going to wrap up today, and we'll talk some more about things tomorrow in your video for e-learning.